Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, April 11th, 2022. My name is Emma Vigeland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Beth Popp Berman, Associate Professor of Organizational Studies at the University of Michigan, on her book, Thinking Like an Economist, How Efficiency Replaced Equality in U.S. Public Policy. Meanwhile, Russian troops appear poised for an assault on the east after strategically withdrawing its forces from outside of Kyiv. 4.5 million refugees have fled Ukraine since the war began, the UN says. Far-right fascist Islamophobe Marine Le Pen will advance to a runoff against incumbent neoliberal centrist Islamophobe Emmanuel Macron in France. Leftist candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon came in third after a surprisingly strong campaign that was fiercely opposed by centrist forces. In Pakistan, after Imran Khan attempted to dissolve the parliament before they tried to vote a vote of no confidence, the military did not back him, as many suspected they might. The vote ended up being successful, and the Pakistani parliament selected the opposition leader Shehbaz Sharif to become the interim prime minister. Khan and his supporters are calling this a US-backed coup. COVID cases have doubled in Washington, D.C. and spiked 60% in New York City since the last week of March. Alaska, Vermont, Colorado, and Rhode Island are also seeing rising numbers. In Idaho, the state Supreme Court has put a stay on its new 6-week abortion ban and bounty system modeled after Texas, as Kentucky's Democratic governor has vetoed the Republican supermajority's anti-abortion legislation, but they have the power to override it. And lastly, Proud Boys leader Charles Donahue has pleaded guilty, whatever, to his actions on January 6th. It's like hanged or hung. And makes sense in this context. And Stop the Steal organizer Ali Alexander has flipped on his fellow insurrectionists. His lawyer says he is now cooperating with the Justice Department.
The guy who appears in pictures with Jack Dorsey of Twitter.
Interesting. Guess he was with the deep state all along. Maybe. I don't know. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. You might have noticed that I am just Emma. I'm here with Matt and Bradley, but we are without Sam. Sam is sick today. He's getting tested, and we will know more soon.
Yeah, respect his HIPAA rights.
Yes.
We'll have an update for you tomorrow.
Right. Don't ask any questions. I'm talking to you, YouTube chat. Bradley, will you be cracking down on any questions that violate?
Any speculation will be treated like, act like he's Kim Jong-un.
Yep. So medical privacy, folks, that's what we're all about here at the Majority Report. And we don't want any funny business.
Get well soon, boss.
Yes, please. Hope, Sam, if you're listening, hope you're feeling better. With that said, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the election in France, because Marine Le Pen, leader of the National Rally far-right party, she attempted to rebrand herself a bit this time after she lost, thankfully, in 2017, but she's back. She's going to be running, I guess, or her father, then her. They'll be running until the day they die. She was like, I'm just going to be a little bit more subtle this time around on the anti-immigrant Islamophobia stuff, but the dog whistles, we have an understanding here, racist here in France. And so she advanced to the runoff more narrowly than was expected. There was a candidate that many people were familiar with, the most prominent leftist in the race who fell up short, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He ran for president for a third time. He overperformed in the polls, but he did come, and he came within a few percentage points of overtaking Le Pen, but he did come up short. So that means that Le Pen is going to face off against the incumbent neoliberal, anti-labor, centrist Emmanuel Macron. Like neoliberal centrists here in the United States, they've essentially calculated that it's more in their interest to appeal to the far right as opposed to appeal to any leftist priority. Instead of embracing leftist politics, which we believe here would be a stronghold against fascism. I think that's the best way to stave off fascism. He's been giving little nibbles of anti-immigrant Islamophobic rhetoric to the French people, which essentially concedes that racism is legitimate. And when you concede that point to your opponent, then we're just talking about degrees of racism. And that's what this election, which is happening later in April, I think April 24th, is going to center around. Macron has targeted anti-Islamophobic groups in France, activist groups. He has been vocal about going against, quote, Islamic separatism. Think the way right-wing politicians here in the United States talk about Islamic extremism. You can apply that a bit more to our domestic terms. So point here is there, yes, is an appetite for Islamophobic rhetoric that someone like Le Pen is satiating, and Macron is trying to appeal to that, but there is also obviously an appetite for the leftist rhetoric that Mélenchon was advocating for, and he overperformed because of that. But there is always only one direction in which neoliberal centrists tack to when they're trying to appeal to a larger audience, and that's to the right. So, like, as Macron moves towards flirting with like healthcare privatization, stuff like that, he's also conceding racist points to his opponent. We'll see how this turns out on April 24th. Most experts say he has a good chance. He is the incumbent, but this is kind of what we're flirting with here.
Do you want racism or do you want capitalism?
That's it. And that they're happy with those choices, at least, you know, in terms of the ruling
as far
elite.
as like elites setting up democracies, that's the best scenario for them, and they've been creating that scenario all over the world for a long time.
Yeah. Let's turn to what's happening in Ukraine. I feel like every day we get a new clip of the insane media coverage where there's like blood dripping from these anchors' mouths when they're talking about the potential U.S. response. I will cite my very unscientific anecdotal experience of my laundry room in my apartment complex building, which has CNN on all the time. I don't think they cover domestic policy at all anymore. Like, never. It's all about Ukraine. Yes, this is a massive story. Russia is presiding over and perpetrating war crimes on a daily basis. It's of course worthy of coverage. We cover it extensively here, but you wouldn't know that there's anything else going on in the world if you were to tune into CNN. It's 24/7.
Yeah, it's simultaneously it's a big story, but also it's a big story that is one that is useful for the corporate partners of CNN to emphasize, because it's going to be a lot of contracts for military industrial stuff.
And it's also just action. You know, you get this
Right.
and plus, I mean,
and there's a bad guy too that isn't us, right?
Right.
There's action in Yemen, but that's not, fun to frame.
And they're brown people or the victims. It's not as interesting. And also, and two, like, before we get to the clip as well, I heard on CNN the other day, they were describing intricately the use of Russian bombs that they might be called nail bombs, but essentially they shrapnel comes out, and it's designed to kill as many people as possible. That's unique to Russia, apparently. It's unique to Russia, apparently. I was unaware of that. But so, like, this is just constantly on people's television screens. And Jake Tapper has traveled to Kyiv to report on this from the ground. Here he is speaking to, is this Jake Sullivan? I'm trying to pull this up right now. Sorry. Here he is speaking to Jake Sullivan, asking him a question about how the United States should respond and what's next, essentially. Are we going to intervene militarily? Here he is.
Because I'm not advocating for any specific action one way or another, but I do have to wonder how the international community, including the U.S., decides what kind of wholesale killing necessitates direct military intervention.
Pause it.
And what kind
okay, sorry. Now, actually, just keep going and pause it briefly after that.
doesn't.
Right.
Because every year on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I read these statements from world leaders that say never again. What exactly are they saying never again to?
Can you pause it now? Okay, so I do have to wonder how the international community, including the U.S., decides what kind of wholesale killing necessitates direct military intervention and what kind doesn't. Historically, it's been what preserves the most amount of capital for the West and what exerts U.S. power and serves imperial interests best. Now, in this case, we are happy that Biden is showing restraint and understands that it doesn't serve any party to get involved in a war with a nuclear power. But the journalists that are leveraging the suffering of the Ukrainian people for more action don't really see it that way. But it's very serious of Tapper to make this claim, and he adds credibility to it by not zooming in, but doing his reporting on the ground in Kyiv there, which he thinks, gives him the legitimacy to make the kind of claim of like, there's been a lot of bloodshed, so why aren't we contributing to more?
Daniel Bessner talks a lot about this, but and I don't think he's the only one to talk about it. But the sort of the Hollywoodification of World War II. The only lesson that America's foreign policy elites like to draw from World War II is that we should intervene militarily a lot faster, and not say like what were the economic conditions that led to the rise of someone like Hitler, and maybe we should do something to like make sure we're not going to recreate that sort of thing. But the only lesson again, like that people like this like to emphasize Hitler, and you saw this a lot where people were talking about Islamofascism in the after the war during the war in Iraq and stuff. It's like we invoke fascism as a way to like get the bombers started up and leaving their leaving the runways and go start dropping bombs. Like that's the only reason we invoke Hitler.
Yeah, and it also, when you use such an example, and we've seen other reporters, media members carelessly make the example of Putin to Hitler here. You understand the emotion that you're evoking from people or attempting to do so. It's literally the flip side of what Putin does when he talks about denazifying Ukraine.
It's symbiotic,
right? You are exploiting this mass tragedy that we all should have learned lessons from in order to create more bloodshed. So continue.
Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Holocaust.
I read these statements from world leaders that say never again. What exactly are they saying never again to?
Well, the United States and the international community are not going to stand by while Russia does what it does. And we haven't stood by. In fact, before this war even began, we indicated that Russia was planning to engage in acts of brutality against civilians. We declassified intelligence that this is not just the random acts of soldiers or units. This is an orchestrated plot from the Kremlin. And even before the war began, we flowed hundreds of millions of dollars of military equipment just last year to the Ukrainians to be able to defend themselves and to beat the Russians back. And we're continuing to do that. The speed, scale, scope of the effort to arm and equip the Ukrainians is unprecedented in recent memory. And it is something that the United States has led the effort to do. And the size and impact of the sanctions on a major economy like Russia is likewise unprecedented. So this is not a story of anyone standing by it. We are taking aggressive action in an effort to both help the Ukrainians succeed on the battlefield and help the Ukrainians have the best possible position at the negotiating table. We will continue to do that. We will continue to rally the world in that regard. And the United States will play the key role it has played thus far in the days and weeks ahead.
So that's the answer there.
Why doesn't that answer make them happy? Like,
I
we're
know.
doing everything we can to get guns to these people in ways that's going to be least noticeable. What more do you want?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if we have some covert action on the ground as well.
Of course.
Yeah, and so, but the point is just that, again, it's Sam said this before. It's all about presenting oneself as like a very serious person. And look, being a journalist in Kyiv right now, we've talked to Jack Crosby about this. I admire the bravery, and or not just in Kyiv, in Ukraine, I should say. It's incredibly dangerous, and we've seen there's the Fox News videographer, other reporters that have died.
This is not that, though.
Yeah, but this is not that.
I mean,
right? Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but there's a real sickness with cable, particularly, where you're spending millions and millions of dollars on these like Hollywood anchors, while you're hollowing out the foreign press offices of maybe you would have like 25 years ago, you would have CNN reporters just in Ukraine. And now if you look at the budgets for all this stuff,
remember when they didn't catch that that Zelensky was being sarcastic?
Right, exactly.
Early on, because they don't have any foreign board, but then they get to put on their green outfit
and send our movie star over there.
Right, exactly.
That's all Jake Tapper is.
While he just recites his lines, probably fed to him, about how we this is a moral crisis in terms of our lack of military intervention that we haven't seen since World War II. I mean, besides the moral crises that we created in, say, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., since then, Vietnam, besides those.
I'm not advocating any position here, but I do have to wonder if you're not letting everyone who died in the Holocaust down a second time by not just starting to bomb Putin in that column right now.
Yeah, George Shultz. I mean, where are you on this? We need him to work on behalf of the State Department to invoke the Holocaust in a bizarre way. All right, folks. Gonna take a quick break, but first, we have some sponsors for you today. So, my mother's birthday was very recently. She's a twin, not identical because she has a brother, and so we were all celebrating. We had a dinner together, and my cousin got him Storyworth, and he was and I said, "That's my sponsor. That's a sponsor for our show." This is about me, this party. Don't you understand?
This isn't about you.
Yeah, no, it's always about me. But it inspired me because I think I can get it for some. I was like, "Damn it, Ashley, it's my cousin. I'm like, you're always better at gifts than me. It's really annoying. I need to start getting this for some of my family members." Storyworth is an online service that helps every mother figure in your life, and this is for Mother's Day potentially, because that's coming up. Reminder. Share stories through thought-provoking questions about their memories and personal thoughts. Every week, Storyworth emails your mom a different story prompt, questions you never thought to ask, like, what is some of the best advice your mother ever gave you? Tell us about the time that you and your relatives went to the beach. Like, stories that are something that you will appreciate to have archived, and your kids will appreciate it, and so on and so forth. After 1 year, Storyworth will compile all your mom's stories, including photos, into a beautiful keepsake book that is shipped for free. Storyworth has helped numerous families learn about each other in profound, special ways, and their testimonials will practically move you to tears. Give your mom the most meaningful gift this Mother's Day with Storyworth. Get started right away with no shipping required by going to storyworth.com/majority. You'll get $10 off your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/majority for $10 off. Storyworth.com/majority. If there's ever been a year to make the moms in your life feel loved and appreciated this Mother's Day, it's the one. Honor your mom, aunt, grandmother, mother-in-law, etc. with a heartfelt, sentimental gift that the whole family can cherish together forever. Storyworth. And now here's one of my favorite sponsors, Liquid IV. If If you're a little dehydrated, you push your body a bit too hard, you're a little hungover, pre-hangover, it's important to stay hydrated, and making a hydration a priority is easier with Liquid IV. 1 stick of Liquid IV hydration multiplier in 16 ounces of water hydrates faster and more efficiently than water alone. Plus, Liquid IV comes in refreshing flavors like watermelon, lemon, lime, strawberry, pina colada, and more. Acai, it's like I have it all the time, and I'm still not sick of that acai. Liquid IV contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, and vitamin C. With Liquid IV, you get 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. Liquid IV is made with premium ingredients and is non-GMO and free from gluten, dairy, and soy. The science of cellular transport technology is what makes Liquid IV so effective. It's designed to enhance rapid absorption of water and other key ingredients into the bloodstream. Again, I use this all the time. I've pushed it on my family members, especially if you're traveling. You have to stay hydrated on the plane. And if you don't want to pull your mask off for like multiple bottles of water, you can kind of, expedite the process by putting some Liquid IV in your bottle of water. Grab Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco, or you can get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MajorityRep at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order when you use promo code MajorityRep, R-E-P, at liquidiv.com. Experience better hydration today at liquidiv.com, promo code MajorityRep. And lastly, ZipRecruiter. Look, I'm not an employer, I'm not a boss, right? But if I was, I'd use ZipRecruiter because, as Sam says all the time, Brendan was hired through ZipRecruiter and he still works with us a little bit. Love Brendan, love Bradley too, even though I don't like to tell him because it's cheesy. But he came through Brendan because Brendan knew Bradley. And so we have the double BRs. Brr, you're so... Oh, and Brandon, right. But that's different situation. So
he was an MR fan, though.
Yes. All right, so... If you're always learning... Wait, sorry. If you're always learning, it keeps you sharp, like ZipRecruiter. Huh. Wait, I need to... Oh, sorry. Share... right now you can try it for the... Shoot. I'm new to these ad reads, folks. Continuing to learn new skills is a great idea. I'd like to learn some better workout stuff. I'd like to learn how to cook better. These are things I'd like to learn. If you're always learning, a pizza cutter keeps you sharp, like ZipRecruiter. Okay. Their
This
AI...
is a copy?
I'm just like... Their AI is always learning. So if you're hiring, AI gets better and faster at finding the right candidate for all of your roles. And right now you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter uses its powerful technology to find and match the right candidates up with your job. Then it proactively presents these candidates to you. You can easily review the recommended candidates and invite your top choices to apply for your job, which encourages them to apply faster. No wonder ZipRecruiter is the #1 rated hiring site in the US based on G2 ratings. And now you can try ZipRecruiter for free at this executive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, we have to take a quick break. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined right now by Beth Popp Berman, Associate Professor of Organizational Studies at the University of Michigan, whose book we'll be discussing today, Thinking Like an Economist, How Efficiency Replaced Equality in U.S. Public Policy. Beth, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Emma. It's great to be with you today.
Oh, well, awesome. Same here. Likewise. I'm really looking forward to talking about your book. You open talking about the election of Obama. And I would say the bulk of your book really focuses on like the 60s to the 80s.
Right.
Why did you choose to open with Obama in particular as a way to like introduce readers to the concepts in your book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of the book is really this history of how, what I'm calling the economic style of reasoning sort of moved into Washington and spread around and took over. But a big part of what I'm also trying to do is show how that had long-term consequences. And it had those effects, particularly for Democrats. And I think, some of my original motivation in writing this book was sort of, being a product of, coming of age in the 1990s and sort of seeing the constraints on democratic politics. And so I really wanted a way to tie very clearly this historical story to constraints on what politics on the left look like that I think are still, were certainly in place in the Obama administration, and I think are still there today.
Absolutely. I mean, you combine despite the changes aesthetics, right? Of course, and I was young when Obama was first getting elected. It was my first formative political experience. The hope and change thing really got to me. But you look at the actual accomplishments, ACA, Dodd-Frank, etc. They really do not come close to the ambitions of the policy sets, policy goals of liberals, Democrats in the 30s and the 70s.
Yeah. And part of what I'm trying to argue here is that what we really had happen was that a particular set of tools for thinking about policy first introduced into Washington and then really spread around, became sort of taken for granted, and really shaped the kinds of policy options that we considered in the future. And so, so when I talk about an economic style of reasoning here, I'm talking about sort of a basic Econ 101 kind of microeconomic reasoning. So thinking about incentives, choice, efficiency, trying to promote choice and competition, these sort of very basic ideas. But as they became more prominent in policymaking, what ends up happening is that in some ways they also become sort of a limiting factor on what kinds of policies can be considered. And so policies that were some of the major accomplishments of Democrats in the 1960s, for example, something like Medicare, if it had to try to be passed a couple of decades later, when you have institutions like the Congressional Budget Office offering scores on policy that predict their costs, it simply wouldn't have been possible to introduce them in the same way.
Yeah, I think I said 70s, but I meant 60s in terms of the ambitions. The parliamentarian basically being the president seems like the culmination of a lot of those things. But I guess like let's start when that economic style of reasoning began to replace the equality rhetoric. Where do you begin to draw that starting to happen historically?
Yeah, so I really see this as starting to be introduced in Washington in the 1960s. And so it is, of course, emerging before that, but it comes from a couple of different places. And one prominent place that it's coming from is, maybe unexpectedly, from the Rand Corporation. And so you've got a bunch of economists from the Rand Corporation who come to Washington. They are interested, they're coming to the Defense Department, first of all, and they're interested in trying to make defense budgeting, make defense spending more cost effective. And so they're perceived as being very successful at what they're doing in the Defense Department. And as President Johnson is trying to ramp up the Great Society, he decides to include some measure of requiring these same kinds of methods to be used in all sorts of different public agencies. And so because the Great Society is resulting in this big, rapid expansion of government at the time, what that means is that this economic style of thinking is really carried into all sorts of places within Washington. And so in a way, it's really sort of an unintentional outgrowth of the expansion of government, sort of also creates these tools for trying to rein it back in as well.
It's incredibly ironic that defense spending was the origin of that kind of thought, given the fact that that's probably the one thing left in Washington that has zero thresholds for efficiency, as like neoliberal economics and conservatives like to talk about.
Yeah, no, it is ironic. And, it is also ironic that the budgeting system that was put in place at the time, it was something called the Planning, Programming, Budgeting System, and the Defense Department still uses it, but it's the only place really that uses it. Everybody else kind of quit using it after 1970.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
So how do you you talk about the microeconomic concepts of incentives, efficiency, et cetera. Yeah, more broadly, how do you define that style of thinking, I guess, as being applied to policy sets like social spending or healthcare within that, environmental policy, antitrust, et cetera?
Yeah, so I think, if you had to boil this way of thinking down to a single word, it would probably be efficiency, and different ways of thinking about the question of efficiency. And then what that looks like as it applies to different kinds of policy domains, looks somewhat different. And so in healthcare policy, for example, one way you see this play out is that there's a move away from arguing for universal healthcare as sort of a political ideal. And instead you get more of a focus of thinking about, well, how do we try to make healthcare as cost effective as possible? How can we make sure that the people who can afford to pay for it are paying for it on their own? Are there ways to try to ensure that people don't use more healthcare than they actually need? And this is often coming from people who desire the expansion of healthcare to more people and who are not anti-government, who are not trying to shrink government, but who really see this as a central value. But it comes into conflict with these more fundamental values and more fundamental language around things like rights to healthcare.
Right. And so that's like one of the things that not shocked me, but I really appreciated your emphasis on how this was really infecting liberals to a degree. Like you always had conservatives wanting to cut costs, I guess. But it was the most insidious part of this is that this is what took over Democrats' thinking, and it kind of defangs any talk of equality or broad social spending that would have any sort of bloat as thought of by traditional economic thinking that, in my opinion, is inapplicable to how a government should run. But you have government should run like a business. That kind of stuff comes from the right. But really, as you write, in the 70s, it's adopted by the left.
Yeah, and that was really part of the story that I wanted to tell here, because I think there's been a lot of attention to sort of free market economics and the Chicago School and economic schools of thought that are more associated with conservatives or libertarians. But this more technocratic economic style that again is not entirely, but mostly promoted by Democrats, has its own kind of effects on what the limits of policymaking are. And one of the things I think you see happen is that by the time that you've got, so this is taking over, it's pretty influential by the time, I say, the Carter administration. But when Reagan comes into office, he is able to use this economic style much more strategically. So when it sort of lines up with his existing policy preferences, he promotes it and encourages it. And in places where it doesn't line up so well, he sort of just sidesteps it or gets rid of it. So he's better able to use it strategically rather than sort of being constrained by it.
I want to talk about Reagan and how he was able to do that, but like let's focus a bit on the 1970s, where this all really starts to ramp up. The welfare state starts to begin to be chipped away. Neoliberalism is this is like when things are starting to escalate. Can you talk a little bit about how this kind of thinking responded to even, Nixon's environmental reforms, and how then that's how this started to get adopted a bit more?
Yeah, environmental policy is sort of an interesting sub-story within this, because environmental policy was actually an area in which economics came fairly late to the game. And so, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, 1970, 1972, these were not yet strongly influenced by economic reasoning. And so, so these bills were written into law, they're kind of coming out of social movements. They are grounded in these ideas about ecology. They are framed around these absolute rights to a clean environment. And they don't take costs into account for explicit political reasons, because there's concern that if you introduce too much focus on costs, it's going to lead to regulatory capture. And what ends up happening is that almost as soon as these laws pass, there is unsurprisingly a backlash against them from companies who don't want to be regulated in this way. And those companies start advocating for more use of cost-benefit analysis of regulations. And what kind of ends up happening here is that you've got economists within, particularly within the Carter administration, who are advancing the idea of more cost-benefit analysis because they're true believers in efficiency, right? They're not trying to reduce environmental regulation on its own sake, but they sort of end up becoming allies with industry because who's trying to pursue the same goal, but for very different reasons.
Right. So, is it fair or too cynical to talk about the deployment of that term as a way to um, put brakes on larger reforms to benefit any interests that would be regulated as more regulations come into play at the latter half of the 20th century?
Yeah, and that language has absolutely been used to rein in the possibilities of what kinds of regulation can be put into place. Now, there have been instances where it's backfired. So, for example, Reagan thought that he was going to be able to use this sort of cost-benefit approach to promote to limit the backlash against leaded gasoline. And so we thought, oh, we don't want to have to get rid of leaded gasoline. Let's do a cost-benefit analysis, and that will help. Well, it turned out in that case, the costs were just so high that no matter what, it just turned out to be overwhelmingly cost-effective to get rid of unleaded gasoline. And so in that case, it backfired. But
Right,
for the
but you
most
could,
part, that wasn't the case.
and we've seen this recently in terms of like these technocratic studies within the government about the costs of what climate change will eventually bring. There are cost benefit analyses done, and then they're just ignored when they don't meet the political moment for the particular politicians in power.
Yeah, and I do think this is part of what actually ends up happening is that, like you said, often cost-benefit analyses are sort of window dressing on the real power politics that's going on behind the scenes. But at the same time, they can be sort of an effective tool for disciplining people who are arguing for something more aggressive. And so it's a way to make more progressive positions seem unreasonable or not sufficiently serious, not being willing to consider costs of policies. And it's used in this political way, even though it wouldn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about how this kind of thinking manifested itself in the Carter administration? Because Carter deregulated a few things, the airlines in particular, my most hated nemesis, because they still are so underregulated, it's insane. Like, that's he's presented colloquially as a idealistic lefty who couldn't get things done, but he got that part done.
Yeah, no, Carter was very much broadly aligned with this kind of way of thinking. He came from this engineering background. The idea of efficiency appealed to him. He generally was a supporter of this kind of approach to policymaking. And in the case of transportation deregulation, people had been trying to do this for some time, but the original reasons that regulation was put into place in the 1930s and earlier, which was really about ensuring stability in markets as much as anything, suddenly starts to seem outdated, and these questions are raised about can we make these markets more efficient by deregulating them? And so Carter's a big supporter of that. He brings in people like Alfred Kahn, who was his deregulation czar. And Kahn says things like that, he's happy to see the Teamsters' wages cut as long as it means that, that the market's becoming more efficient.
So how much of that was, how swift was that transition within the Democratic Party from, like, say, the start of the 1970s to then you have pre-Reagan Carter just eating up that kind of, is it the chicken or the egg thing? Did that allow Carter to rise to the top? What was that? That seems like a very immediate takeover of the Democratic Party in a short period of time with that ideology.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit more gradual than that. I think the real 1965 to 1980 is probably kind of the key period. But Carter was, in some ways, I think, a lucky break as much as anything. I certainly don't think that the influence of economic reasoning was a reason that Carter got elected. And I also, don't want to underestimate the influence of everything else that was going on politically and economically at the time. But certainly, by the time that Carter's administration is wrapping up, and by the early years of the Reagan administration, this has become kind of the dominant approach within the Democratic Party, and it really stays that way. Certainly through the Obama years.
And how did, during that period of 65 to 80, as you talk about, both interest groups in that arena begin to grow, and also how did, through their influence and politicians buying in, how did those reforms become institutionalized through law?
Yeah, the interest groups kind of played different roles in different policy domains, right? So one other area that I talk a lot about in the book is antitrust policy. And in antitrust, you had a very strong enforcement regime in the 1950s and 60s. You start to have economic arguments for relaxing it that kind of are becoming more influential in the 60s and 70s. And then at the same time, you have, Fortune 500 companies, really the very, very biggest companies, who are also strongly advocating for less antitrust enforcement and who are very explicitly supporting the people who are trying to introduce more economics into antitrust policy. And so you do often have this aligning of particular interests in specific policy domains. But then in terms of how it actually gets institutionalized in policymaking, part of the story of this book is that it's less about people with actual economics degrees coming to Washington and being in some kind of advisory position and having the ear of the president. It's really about being embedded into lots of different obscure offices within Washington, and having direct kinds of influence, for example, through the creation of public policy schools, which didn't exist prior to the late 1960s, but kind of go on to train whole generations of people who go on to take positions in Washington in the sort of basics of this way of thinking about policy.
Yeah, and so that it's a ground up approach, I guess, right, in terms of instituting this kind of thinking. We're on the left, and it shows just how entrenched it is in terms of like trying to change it to a more equality perspective, it's not just a few politicians who are more public facing. It's all of these bureaucrats and all of these just like regular workers who were trained in this way.
Right, and the space of think tanks is another place where this is really relevant as well. You
Yeah.
know, a lot of the big think tanks, you know, some of them grew directly out of these changes that occurred in the late 60s. So, for example, a place like the Urban Institute, you know, is very directly a response to President Johnson rolling out economics throughout government. And so a lot of think tanks that are broadly associated with the Democratic Party, it really reflect this broad economic way of thinking, and tend to be at least a little bit resistant to more rights-based claims, or sort of starting with equality as the starting point, and only later considering efficiency consequences.
Right. You said rights-based claim, and I wrote this down when you were speaking earlier because I didn't want to forget it. Efficiency is unable, in my opinion, to reckon with a broad claim about a human right, because I mean, like or an economic right, or a societal right that is going to be enshrined by the government, because you're unable to make a to make a broad sweeping protection in that area while also making these microeconomic claims. It's completely incompatible, and that's what's the most, I think, troubling thing at the heart of what you write about here.
Yeah, and I think one nice example of where you really see that very explicitly is in debates around environmental justice, where, you know, the environmental justice movement came in the 1980s as sort of a descendant of the civil rights movement. It's explicitly focused on, you know, rights to a clean environment in these racialized communities that are being polluted in. And it's got these strong moral claims to, you know, we need to get rid of pollution. It needs to end. You know, we have an absolute right to a healthy living environment. And what ends up happening is that by the time that makes it to Washington, it sort of gets translated into economic terms. And so it's sort of taking a little bit of the original claims about, hey, let's be more concerned about pollution in marginalized communities and its disproportionate effects. But let's think of that in terms of cost effectiveness and risk analysis, and take a little bit of that justice language out. And so in the attempt to sort of turn it into something that is more compatible with economic reasoning, it becomes, you lose some of that moral claim that grounded the original movement to begin with.
And you say in economic reasoning, right? Like it's a very specific kind, because there could be Keynesian economic reasoning, but that's completely abandoned by this period, and we're only starting to see some very few select politicians elected that are like more embracing that kind of rhetoric. Not even to the degree that I'd like, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I really try to make this distinction of the book of, this is really specifically about microeconomics, and it also is, you know, it's definitely its own style of thinking, but it's also something that evolves over time and can change over time. And so, you know, certainly economics has, you know, the discipline has come to care about a lot of issues that it didn't necessarily pay attention to 10 or 20 years ago. You know, there's a ton of research on inequality now that just wasn't a topic of concern 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And you know, you see people working on new kinds of issues as well. So there's a lot of attention right now to the question of labor, you know, pay and labor markets, and whether workers are being deprived of you know, some of the income that they would get because markets are particularly concentrated. And so you know, there is this potential for economics to embrace a different set of concerns, but the way that's played out in practice has not often, you know, it has not often played out that way.
Yeah, that's then we could get into like more larger critiques of capitalism in general. But I want to, stick on the larger thesis because I can go on a tangent forever. But before I let you go, I didn't want to pass over the Clinton administration and how that codified a lot of the dynamics that you explore here. Can you talk about what that meant for this philosophy being enshrined in government? Like the first Democratic president to be elected in some time, and he was the embodiment of a lot of this.
Yeah, I think this philosophy again just aligned very well with Clinton's general approach to governance. And you see basically a lot of the big Clinton initiatives are policies that are broadly in line with this way of thinking. And so if you look at something like Clinton's healthcare efforts, they are organized around the idea that we're going to try to, we're going to try to make markets work better in healthcare, and then two, we're going to really think about cost effectiveness as a central part of what it is that we're trying to do. You see it in environmental policy, the stuff that I was just talking about with environmental justice, that's all happening during this period. And you see it in an area like antitrust, where this new technocratic kind of efficiency-centered way of thinking about antitrust becomes this bipartisan consensus, and it's no longer seen as political at all. It's just assumed that this is the way we do it. This is how everybody believes that antitrust policy should work. And so that really gets locked in by that point in time. And Clinton is very much aligned with this broad style.
Yes, and as you mentioned, unfortunately, despite the rhetoric, Obama did continue a lot of that as well. But there is this tension now, of course, with the left, and there's an understanding among younger people that this is not the way that the party that's supposed to be the left of the Republicans should be conducting its public policy. Do you have hope, based on what you've seen, that there's a new a new day coming around with the left coming around? But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's right. It's an uphill battle, but I think there's no question that there are policies on the table among Democrats. There are debates within the party over policies that would have been considered beyond the pale 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So whether you're talking about something like the Green New Deal and trying to kind of actively use industrial policy to address climate change, whether you're talking about new levels of antitrust enforcement, all these, whether talking about something like student loan forgiveness, which was just, which even progressive economists still tend not to like as a concept, and would have been kind of inconceivable that would be a real policy being considered in, say, 2015. But it's clear that there's still a lot of entrenched interest, and I'd be the first one to say that economists certainly aren't controlling everything, right? There's lots of money and power and all sorts of things going on. But just the fact that these are a serious part of policy debate now, I think shows how much things have changed, and gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, it gives me hope too, and it doesn't. There's such a dichotomy that's apparent when you see that kind of policy idea. Someone like, Ocasio-Cortez pressuring Biden on that, or even like someone like Chuck Schumer saying we should cancel up to $50,000. That's interesting, but like Biden doesn't want to do that. Even if he does end up doing it, he is not. He is a creature. He is a creation of this he wants to use debt to discipline people. He is another politician of the old guard of the Democratic Party, who was born out of the dynamics that you write about.
Yeah, and I think there's no question that real lasting change, I think, is going to come from the bottom up, right? It's going to come from social movements, and it's going to come from electing local politicians who are a different generation and who are committed to a different set of ideas and just have different ways of seeing the world. And so, I think I do think Biden has some degree of serious commitment to workers, but also that this is still, this broad way of thinking is very much kind of his go-to and his default as well. And so I think for him to be sort of pulled towards some of these policies, it really takes that kind of social movement pressure and new politicians who are willing to make those arguments who weren't in office, 8 years ago.
Right, or in his case, like 40 years ago. Beth Popp Berman, Associate Professor of Organizational Studies at the University of Michigan. Her book is called Thinking Like an Economist, How Efficiency Replaced Equality in U.S. Public Policy. Beth, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. It was great talking to you.
Yes, likewise. All right, folks. Well, that brings us to the end of the first hour of this program. I know when she said antitrust, I think Sam would have loved to have been here for this interview. He even texted us saying, "I wish he wishes he could have been there." But that was excellent. So thank you to Beth. And with that said, we're gonna wrap things up and head into the fun half. But first, it's a new week, which means there's a new Left Reckoning.
Yeah, for patrons of Left Reckoning at Left Reckoning or patreon.com/Left Reckoning, David Griscom and I did a think tank. We talked about a couple of things. Paracon, we had a question about parallel economics, I think is what it's short for. And Griscom went into his skepticism, learned skepticism about that. I'm sort of ignorantly skeptical of it. And we also talked about a couple of other things. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to the post. Also, go subscribe to the YouTube channel. We passed 20,000 subscribers, but I want to get to 25 because once you hit a milestone, you're kind of over it. So help us get to 25,000.
Do it. All right, we are going to head into the fun half. We will be taking your calls. We will be reading your IMs. We will be watching clips and laughing and mocking, and then maybe also getting angry as well. All of that. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomiki.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports.
We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go throw up.
Libertarians. They're so stupid, though. Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering. I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-35-501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
6, 5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You can call it satire. Sam goes with satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the weak being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Oh, we are back in the nick of time. I get back to my seat. Let's read some IMs. Sam's softest caller. Bonus and majority report. Heck yes. I know. I mean, I wish it were under different circumstances, but
They get a lot of bonuses, maybe.
yeah, we'll see. Even speculation like that is a violation of his HIPAA rights, so you'll be hearing from HR. Teacher Dan, is appealing to a racist right the new centrism? Think it's the old and the new.
centrism.
Yeah.
I mean, go look at like the Civil War and like Reconstruction where America's deciding like, oh yeah, the sort of fight against sort of slavery and that sort of liberatory stuff, we need to put that behind us and focus more on using the military to break strikes and dispossess Native Americans.
Yeah, and I mean, even like Lincoln used like more centrist rhetoric about slavery in order to get elected. So
Yeah, Lincoln wasn't the farthest left on slavery.
no. And he also was like advocating for Black people to return to Africa as well. He wasn't somebody who perceived like Black people as equal to white people. He was not a radical abolitionist by any means. So, custodial artists, racism and capitalism go hand in hand. Yes. Teacher Dan, Ukraine is a handy distraction for a MSM CNN that was happy to say goodbye to Trump in order to welcome into office a Reagan. Tapper is a free market war cheerleading smug puke. Well said. All right, let's take a call.
It is funny, like, sorry, just real quick on
go.
that note, Fox News is a particular menace, MSNBC, but CNN is interesting that it takes less heat, I feel like, than the other two because there's not a partisan sort of backing or reason to attack it. But it really like that's sort of like the pure cable, like, because like they like took a strong anti-Trump thing after he won, but they were obviously like pumping him up a lot, gave him a lot of free publicity beforehand, and I don't know, it's just it's like the control, like MSNBC is sort of like Democrat and Fox News is Republican, of course, but more interesting is the ones that are just sort of like free flowing.
You said something about the like a few weeks ago about how CNN cable news is for people to feel like they're informed without being informed, and there's nothing that makes people more informed than like wartime reporting.
Yeah, it sucks. It's like we're conditioned to feel like what we need from the national news is some sort of decontextualized sort of conflict zone reporting, where we're the good guys, and then what we need from the local news is like some horrible sort of
bloody crime
violent,
down the street,
like some story that mixed with like violence and mental illness that can make everyone feel afraid, and then also there's something that's going to kill your kids under the bathroom sink. So we are, and all that is particularly visual video news is just particularly horrible in America because there is no real standards.
Did you ever see the movie Nightcrawler, either of you guys?
That's a great movie.
Yeah, in terms of that local news dynamic, it doesn't get much better than that. So I'd recommend that. Jake Gyllenhaal is pretty scary in it. Calling from an 864 number. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Speakerphone. Yeah, this is Dan from Boiling Springs.
Dan from Boiling Springs. What's on your mind?
Well, I did call a few weeks ago talking about the left-right brain hemisphere dynamics. Just a reference.
Okay.
I've been spending some time discussing this in the spirituality forums on Reddit, and I kind of have some good news. Not about that subject, but I have noticed that a lot of people engaging with that kind of like new age spirituality seem to be getting quite disillusioned with some of the QAnon stuff.
Interesting.
They're coming.
Tell me more.
Okay, well, it seems like the overall gist is that they are beginning to feel a disconnect between what they consider like their inner spiritual motives and like this hatred and vitriol that is encapsulated in some of these more extreme conspiracy theorists. And one of the things for me, and maybe for you as well, is seeing some of these new age spiritual types who tend to be like coming from like the Grateful Dead culture or like crystal culture or whatever, falling down these QAnon rabbit holes and like seemingly losing well-intentioned good people in this morass of just conspiracy and stuff. And they seem to be kind of breaking away from that.
I hope so.
I'm seeing a lot less.
I'm very familiar with the first leg of the dynamic you described, but you're saying that you think that they're pulling away. What's some of the information that you have on that front?
Just like seeing certain subreddits about like decultifying themselves, like, and a notice of like a lot of online spiritual gurus, like say like Russell Brand and people like him who have kind of bought into these conspiracies, and they seem to see the cult-like atmosphere from which they've been engaged in. Now, maybe not across the board, but enough of these discussions that seem to indicate that people are starting to maybe feel intuit that what they're receiving is not genuine, not coming from a holistic place, but maybe just a like a conspiracy, like for instance, you can tell. I don't know who all the spiritual gurus are, but like you can tell like when, for instance, Russell Brand made his shift into anti-vax. Like that seems to be the nexus, like that anti-vax conspiracy tended to just fit right on in with theirs. And it's almost as if initially that anti-vax thing on the right kind of validated their own experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe 2 years out to, what was it, 3 years, 2 years, 5 years? I don't know. It seems like they're really beginning to understand, at least I think intuitively, that there's something off about that whole thing. And so it's been a real pleasure for me to kind of talk about this hemisphere duality in a way that makes it logical for people for them to see why they're so set in their beliefs, and maybe how to take them away from concentrating on the minutia data and put that into the bigger picture, which is where spirituality comes from in essence, is right. Kind of like anyway. So I just thought that was really good to see, and maybe a hopeful sign that some of this conspiracy stuff is starting to lift, and maybe we can start talking about things of spiritual natures without all that culty gobbledygook that tends to be permeating online right now.
I hope
so. That's
so
just
too.
my thought. Yeah. So anyway,
I appreciate it. I think that
absolutely.
that if they're getting de-radicalized in that way, that community has some branches that the left can appeal to. So I appreciate it,
For
Dan.
sure.
Thank you.
I mean, that's
absolutely. Have a wonderful day.
You
That's
too, bye.
the trend for any sort of, I mean, whether it's religion, right? Schism is the typical, rather than cohering more and more sort of tightly, you get schisms. And like, I don't know, the QAnon stuff is almost like it's like a spiritual revival that took place in the context of a post-Citizens United media environment. So everything is geared towards campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's about like some sort of like wide-reaching pedophile conspiracy. And I don't know, it's probably bad, but it doesn't surprise me because I always thought like it'd be tough to. I don't feel like these things just snowball into like taking over the world. Like I think you get a brief moment and then all of a sudden the people realize like, hey, this is kind of geared towards getting like Matt Gaetz elected. I don't know like if that's what I'm really interested in.
Right. All right, let's watch this Chris Coons clip. Chris Coons wants to be mini Biden, right? Came up in the wake of Biden's success as a senator in his state, and he's been as gung-ho Biden as it possibly gets.
He's like, think about him like the little pro credit card demon that sits on Biden's left shoulder.
Yeah. And in many ways, that's like the kind of creature that the state of Delaware creates from in the Democratic Party, given the fact that it's a haven for companies to avoid certain kinds of taxation. You get lots of companies incorporated in Delaware, so you get a senator like Chris Coons, who is probably among some of the more shadowy senators opposing the social spending agenda he doesn't get the headlines that Manchin and Sinema get, but him and Mark Warner come to mind as people who are likely pulling some strings behind the scenes. And here he is talking about the Supreme Court, discussing Ketanji Brown's confirmation process, and he says that Democrats are part of the problem too, particularly him, because he once voted no, and he might be contributing to the toxicity.
As you think about the current forces that have increasingly polarized the process and your own votes for Trump's Supreme Court nominees, do you stand by them, or do you think in a different world you might have thought about those votes differently?
I've recently been talking about that with some colleagues. So I was my office now was John McCain's office, and I think a lot about John. I was in that exact office with a bipartisan group of senators as Judge Gorsuch was being nominated for the Supreme Court, and a group of us were debating whether we could somehow come up with an agreement to not end the filibuster, the 60-vote threshold for justices, in exchange for allowing Gorsuch to move forward. And I was digging into his record and philosophy, and there was one case, the Hobby Lobby case, where he'd written the circuit court, and I just was really struggling with it. Yeah. I would say Gorsuch was the closest for me, where I knew him.
Where you almost showed
I had a sense of him, his writings.
But is it about judicial philosophy or advice and consent?
That's the point. That was the point at which I first voted against a nominee for the Supreme Court, not based on his eminently qualified, great temperament, good writer, strong record of service, but I disagreed with his philosophy. And Senator Graham and I had a very forceful exchange at that point, where he said to me, I voted for Kagan, I voted for Sotomayor. Yeah. If you're not willing to vote for Gorsuch, what's that mean? And so I will own that I'm a part of this problem, and recognize that with Senator Graham saying in this process he's voting against her, he was the last one on the committee who had a history of voting for qualification, not for or against philosophy.
Yeah, what Matt almost vomited everywhere in the middle of that clip. What happened before Neil Gorsuch was nominated? Who was nominated to the Supreme Court before Neil Gorsuch? Whose seat did Neil Gorsuch take? I'm just thinking about that a little bit. What might have contributed to the polarization of the Supreme Court nominating process before that? Oh, wait, it was Lindsey Graham can get irate with Chris Coons all he wants, but it was what Lindsey Graham and the rest of the Republicans eagerly participated in, was this like ridiculous notion that it was too close to an election to nominate Merrick Garland and hold any hearings on Merrick Garland to get him onto the Supreme Court. That is what broke this process, essentially. Republican extremism. And so instead of tucking your tail between your legs and saying, you're going to hit me, well, I'm going to concede. you should hit back. And that's what you did. And now he's saying, I regret actually participating in politics. Because it's a real good insight into how someone like Chris Coons perceives politics there. The masturbatory talk about the fact that he resides in John McCain's office. The way that he talks about how he was trying so hard not to end the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees. Like, they perceive themselves as gatekeepers of process. And what our process does is it gets in the way of like actual moral and significant progress in this country from a policy perspective. So he's apologizing to PBS here for voting on principles and record, like the Hobby Lobby case that he cites there for Gorsuch, which, you know, I don't know if Chris Coons is aware of what's happening in the goddamn news right now. Hobby Lobby might be a little bit relevant as Republican lawmakers throughout this entire country try to not just clamp down on abortion, but on birth control. That's the next wave. So instead of like, you know, cosplaying some sort of West Wing fantasy, maybe you shouldn't be apologizing for trying to oppose a nominee that would claw back human beings' rights in this country. That's where your priority should lie. Not on filibuster protection, not on congeniality with Lindsey Graham, not on a religious commitment to bipartisanship. Maybe it doesn't matter what like precedent and process is, especially when you're facing an extremist opposition party. Maybe you should hang your hat on actual principles, policy principles, not just like office fucking politics.
I mean, the good news is he should be upset because this is a new era where this sort of bullshit about qualifications is dispensed with, and it gets down to the business of this is political. Great. Chris Coons, hopefully, it will be a lot about as alive as the Tyrannosaurus Rex is, his political philosophy in like 10 years or so, because like that whole thing about, I sat at the desk of whose desk, but John McCain.
John McCain. That's his old office.
That's such a politician thing to do, like an old era politician. Like I remember Byron Dorgan, the former senator from North Dakota, used to always talk about how I have the desk of Harry Truman. It's like, well, Harry Truman sucks. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing about taking the Supreme Court, this sort of like bipartisanship. Like, good. I'm glad that's dead. I'm sure you're sad about it because Coons is one of the Democrats who is trying to knife in the back any sort of anything that would go against capital interests in this country. He's absolutely like, he would rather sacrifice electoral power for like continuance of capital power. So
that's what bipartisanship is, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm glad it's over. I'm glad that him and Lindsey Graham aren't speaking anymore, and I hope that they never repair that damage.
The like problem solvers at the center, the problems that they're solving are threats to capital.
Yeah.
Period. It's a rear guard for the conservatives in this country, who are a party that only represents those interests and racists by proxy. And then you have Democrats, useful idiots who, well, not even, some are useful idiots and some are just like paid to be this way, like Chris Coons, who do this gladly. And then in order to live with themselves, assign some sort of abstract morality to it that's indecipherable from the public eye, that has only to do with your interpersonal relationships between each senator. And then you pretend like you're actually standing up for something. It's just such bullcrap constantly. Anyway, Chris Coons sucks.
And I mean, it shouldn't never miss the opportunity to emphasize that he's one of Biden's closest allies. And if there's anything that has been predictive of Biden's lack of fight for things like whatever, BBB, the PRO Act, it's because Chris Coons is his buddy.
Poor baby Graydon. I'm a little bit behind, but chill with that Lincoln slander. I mean, it's not slander. It's just like, that's the context of the time.
Yeah, like you should have a very, very complex understanding of Abe Lincoln, who simultaneously like had the character to be one of the best leaders at a very key moment in American history and world history, frankly, and also extremely a product of his time, and like not somebody that we should be putting into bronze statues, frankly. I mean, not that we should putting the point about that is we shouldn't be idolizing anybody in that way. We should go back to the Puritans and banning idolatry of all forms like that.
Yes. That's the first. That's the one thing we should do.
That's why I'm the most American. That's how I wade into the Abe Lincoln statue debate. It's like, you would take down statues of Abe Lincoln. It's like, yes, I'm a Puritan.
Right, right, exactly. Train boy, we get it, Senator Coons. You and John McCain used to F. Oh God, why would you put that image in our mind? On ground activism. A few months back, I had asked you what stakes you really have when progressives fail. The Amazon union win proved that you and the likes of AOC have nothing at stake, and we can win without you. It's all about on ground action. You and your show are relevant as ever, and you have done nothing to impact change. People on the ground striking, putting life and work on the line are real heroes. You are react and Andes making pocket money. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Union Jack. Emma, it saddens me to share the impact of anti-AOC rhetoric after she challenged and tried to get limelight from Christian Smalls and Amazon. Okay, so this is just the same stuff. Amazon union win. I've seen at least a dozen of my friends stop talking about her when we talk policies and activisms, and they say that the thing that put them off was the way she dissed their own constituents who works at the warehouse.
It's bad.
Crystal Ball and other wannabes were not even a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I conceded that she made a mistake. But I don't love the focus on her.
But listen to what
That's
Christian
really it.
Smalls is saying. Like, I don't look, the focus. Christian Smalls put the focus on it. It's fine. But Christian Smalls also said this is a marathon, not a sprint, and everyone can redeem themselves. This can be a productive thing, and I move on. Like,
Yeah.
like,
I mean, I just.
and AOC does have to do better. Like, I don't know, whatever, she can.
Yep. DNC Google pundit. Good thing she wasn't talking about Social Security, or Sam would have been really pissed about not being in today. LOL. Yeah, I hope he feels better. Aaron is not cool. Matt, great job on Left Reckoning last week. I was able to finally forward this channel to my friends who were BC. I think he means who were big on Waz's insight on the NBA.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah, we had a great show with Waz. We have 2 interviews with Waz on Left Reckoning. One on the formation of the Players Union that we did last year, Players Association, and then this most recent one on the player empowerment era that I think are nice little suite of interviews.
2 kids in a trench coat. Hey, Millennial Report crew, do you think NBA playoff cities will impose vaccine mandates for events over 5K people if the Nets are playing their team?
Sorry, what was that?
Hey, Millennial Report crew, do you think NBA playoff cities will impose vaccine mandates for events over 5,000 people if the Nets are playing their team?
It's not going to be.
Oh, they're
provisional like
joking.
that.
They're basically saying to get Kyrie not to play.
I mean, I don't quite understand because like he's not going to be able to play in Toronto.
Right.
Right.
Right. But that's not.
But
the
it's not just
matchup.
Kyrie. Like there are other players that that are going to have problems playing in Toronto because they're not vaccinated, but they're home.
We just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I'd be very curious to know what percentage of players have fake vax cards. There's probably a lot. Also, Emma, what do you think about the Giants' 7th pick for the Packers' 28th and 53rd? What do I think of trading the 7th pick for the 28th and 53rd pick? Aaron, get real. That's way too big of a jump. I mean, you got to offer multiple firsts for that kind of thing. But appreciate the IM. All right. Calling from a 626 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 626.
Yeah, this is William from Toyabe, California.
William from Toyabe, California. What's on your mind?
Well, I had a few ideas, concerning the Texas abortion law, and I'm probably, I don't know, it sounds genius in my mind until I actually say it to regular people, and so I'm just to forego my short-sightedness. I was just wondering, like, if they have 6 weeks to get an abortion legally, technically, if that's what's written in the law, Why not in certain states, or maybe with providers, when the woman goes in, say like they suspect they're pregnant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of how long or their due date, why not just put, oh, they tested that they're pregnant, and maybe have some questionnaire that says, when was the last time you had sex? Oh, I had sex last week. And they just say, okay, well, it turns out you're just like a few days pregnant. They
Well,
would
it's
be
not
able to,
detectable. It's not really detect. The earliest most tests can detect is like 3 weeks. So I understand what you're saying. Basically, fudge the numbers.
yeah. And, like the same way, but you got to also walk this into the conservatives the same way, like Marjorie Taylor Greene says, oh, it's a violation of my HIPAA rights to figure out whether or not I'm vaccinated. Well, obviously, how would other people know anything about somebody else's business with that being their HIPAA rights? And then maybe blue states need to start drafting legislation.
My guess is that there's like going to be there would be some punitive action on, the doctors can tell how far along you are, right? So the
Yeah,
doctor.
but I mean, the doctor would have to be willing to go with this,
I
I'm
think it's
sure there's some that won't.
Yeah, look, it's a risky situation for a provider to do en masse, right? And they're already so threadbare in terms of the protections that they get in these states. So a lot of times they're just gonna like prioritize women that are within that threshold. Um, I mean, and hopefully maybe there will be some providers that skirt the law in that area. But I don't think you can ask to do that en masse, you know?
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just saying, like, if it helps one or two women not lose their rights, I mean, and the sad thing is they shouldn't have to do that. But I mean, the Republicans always get results by hook or by crook, and sometimes, if it's in the best interest, because the conservatives, like, if you're a conservative woman and you get pregnant and you choose to carry the term or you choose to do whatever, they have the right to do that.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't anybody else have the right to do what's with that? I mean, they're not losing any of their rights, but they're taking other people's rights away.
Well, they've convinced themselves that it's murder. Like, that's the short answer. The Bible says abortion is murder, so you don't have the right to that. That's their response.
Maybe in certain people's minds, but I mean, if you're going against those biblical literalists, I mean, I don't see where
the biblical
it says that.
The biblical literalists are making the laws right now.
I know. Like, I mean, I was a biblical literalist. That's why I left Christianity, because obviously, like, I can go by the Bible literally, and it literally is doesn't make sense. Like,
yeah.
But
look, I mean,
I don't know.
I hear your concerns, and it's like the thing about it is like now we're talking about this is what you're saying in the best case scenario is that this would only be a stopgap for like actually like bringing back rights for women. And it would, I think, endanger a lot of doctors and providers criminally in the process. So I hear what you're saying.
But
it's just
the thing is they would have to violate the HIPAA rights to even figure that out. You see what I mean? Like the same way, even if like somebody's trying to get help for a child of theirs that might want to transition, well, how are people going to figure that out unless they volunteer that information? I mean, and this could be a good time for bureaucracies not to keep good stats on certain things, because obviously that would be another way of them trying to single out people for actual persecution. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of something,
I get it.
Like,
I think the only thing is legislative change. But what you're saying is like your mind is in a good place in terms of like trying to help people out. I
mean, yeah,
I just feel like in reality it's like and but yeah, legislation is pretty much the real key. Like,
All right. Well, thanks for the
brother.
call, Will.
All right.
Have a good one. Bye.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of making do and skirting around the law, because it's going to get really messy. And like, I forget who posted it, but the idea that a miscarriage makes you suspicious at this point now, and we're gonna have to deal with that too.
That happened in where was that where the woman was acquitted, Bradley? Do you remember? Was it in Texas? Uh yeah. The South Texas District Attorney has announced the dismissal of a murder charge against a woman who authorities said performed a quote self-induced abortion.
This is gonna happen all the time.
Yes. And Lizelle Herrera was arrested Thursday by the Starr County Sheriff's Office and charged with murder. Just a reminder that minorities, Latina, Black women are going to be targeted much more so than rich white ladies. So the judge dismissed this, but we're going to see more claims brought about this. It's literally incentivized by the legislation, quite literally. All right, let's do a clip. I guess this isn't a clip, but the tech CEO thing. Did you see this, Matt? All right, yeah. Okay. So this guy, he's a tech CEO. He's not in the United States, I believe, based in the U.S.
And we say a tech CEO. It's not like he's doing like technology of how to teach kids to read good. It's read well. I know I'm doing the Zoolander thing.
Yes.
He is a tech CEO in that he has an online stock brokerage.
Right. And this stuff is just like so dystopian. Let's pull this up right here. And like yet another day in late stage capitalist examples. We are running a fun health program at his company, Zero DHA Online. Anyone on our team with a BMI of less than 25 gets half a month's salary as bonus. The average body mass index of our team is 25.3, and if we can get it to below 24 by August, everyone gets another 1/2 month as a bonus. It'd be fun to compete with other companies. Smiley face. The lowest average BMI or the largest change in average BMI wins. The winner chooses a charity everyone else contributes to. Maybe a health tech company can run the initiative. If you want to do this at your company, do post in the comments. Happy World Health Day. P.S. I know BMI isn't the best measure to track health and fitness, but it is the easiest way to get started. With health and most other things in life, the most important bit is to get started. By the way, walking 10,000 steps daily is a great start if you've been wanting to get healthy. So the whole, there's so much to say here. One, you could just allocate that extra money that you're going to give to the competitor of who loses the most weight in your anorexia competition for your employees so that they can get more money, and you could just give that to them in terms of like salaries and benefits. There's just pay your workers. Two, the obsession with like healthy living from really wealthy people is one of my biggest pet peeves. You know, you could buy that in Big Mac, or you could buy some kale for that same amount of money. What are you going to do instead? That kind of stuff. Like, it's born of ignorance from people who have the ability to walk 10,000 steps daily, who, I don't know, might not have 3 minimum wage jobs that they have to work in a week on a weekly basis, that might preclude them from moderate exercise in order to get their BMI down.
Yeah, I'm looking at my steps. I actually do a good amount of walking because I have the luxury of being able to walk to work, to and
Same,
from work.
yeah.
So I like average like 8,000, 7,000. 10,000 steps is still a lot. Like you need a certain kind of lifestyle unless you're doing it on your commute for work to be able to do that. And that's just like it is like you don't know what you're talking about, bro.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to look at my steps, but that might not be the purpose of this segment. But anyway, yeah.
I average 10,057 steps a day. So, but that's like, again, because I basically get 6,000 to and from work every day.
Yeah, we work in the city and we live in Brooklyn and we can walk to work in Brooklyn. That is a very specific.
If you commute to work in a car, you're like, I don't know how you do that, right? Like I guess like I get up, drive to work, drive back to work. Oh, I guess it's time for my 10,000 steps now. I'm glad I have a lifestyle that allows me to do that.
Right. And then like my third point beyond the pay your workers, this is like the privilege of a perspective from a very wealthy person, is that this is about bosses who feel that they have ownership over their workers' bodies outside of the workplace. I mean, think about like employers that still do marijuana testing or things like that. Um, you know, that there are a lot of bosses who think that their employees need to like outside of the workplace maintain the lifestyle that is appropriate for the brand, and it's just like the way that I think, capitalism encroaches in every part of society and in every part of a person's life.
Well, and it's just it's like a Wizard of Oz style concealing of, oh, I guess we just have enough to hand out half a month's salary as bonuses based on your whims of like health at this point. Like, how about this? How about if you guys want me to help us in this competitive body mass index competition, well, you're gonna start needing to pay me, otherwise I'm gonna be ordering fast food and losing this entire competition for us. That would be my play. Because apparently we just have money floating around. Like, I mean, that's actually the real point in this, is that particularly in Silicon Valley, your boss is a giant pinata full of money, and you should smash it open, as opposed to let them decide, what you should before they start weighing you.
Yeah, they're
Telling you
weighing.
how much money and bonuses they should give you.
You see like a micro example of this in here in New York even, like there are companies that will as bonding activities, everybody goes to a workout class together, and even that I find uncomfortable. It's
No, I mean, Japan has that culture where they do like the morning workouts, but it's more collective, I feel like.
as
And
opposed to competitive,
yeah, exactly.
who can get the lowest BMI. And there also have been studies shown that BMI like disproportionately says that non-white people are unhealthy despite like just it different body shapes, etc. It doesn't take those things into account. It's just anyway.
Hey, it's the easiest way to get started.
Yep.
Stop asking questions.
I understand there might be issues with it, but all right.
We have half a month's salary to give away. So let's just...
Stop asking questions. Genuinely concerned, pragmatic viewer. As a longtime viewer and old school progressive, I'm honestly appalled at your reticence to label Putin as the most monstrous world leader with the most disastrous regime in the 21st century. It's not like there's anything else happening in this country. Lawmakers aren't crafting anti civil rights legislation at a breakneck speed. What do you have to say to the broader Jewish community for your practically Nazi apologia by proxy? On an unrelated note, big fan of the show. Hope Sam recovers soon and the diagnosis is good. Yes, me as well.
I'm sorry, Putin is the ultimate bad.
Zero D hot. Emma, if you want a perspective from inside, I actually am from India. I have worked at Zero DHA for a year. It is one of the most welcoming startups in India. I have the most competitive salary in the market here, and the team is one of the best in the country. Please do a research. Maybe the post was distasteful, but you definitely should research more about Chemath and Zero
No.
DHA.
I'm sorry, no. I don't need to do any more research about that. I'm sure if you think the culture is fine, I'm glad
Happy for you.
The culture from the outside is abhorrent. and I don't think it requires more I don't know, what do we look at, like Glassdoor or something like
I
that?
guess.
Like, no, your CEO should be embarrassed by that, and you shouldn't be doing the body mass index competition. And thanks for listening to the show.
Yeah, I mean, I walk to work and I average like 3,000 steps a day according to my phone. That's not even whatever. 10,000 a day is crazy.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah, Aaron is not cool. The farthest I walked last month was 14K steps, and that was a fundraising walk. 10K a day is a lot.
The most steps I've done sort of in since this phone's been tracking was actually pretty recently last month. I did 27,000 steps or 26,000 steps one day. But that was in Madrid, like just walking around the city
Yeah,
all
right,
day.
right. Maybe let's do. Do you guys have anything you have on your mind in
Got
terms
the
of
student
clips?
loan stuff, or
Oh yeah.
I guess there's Charlie Kirk. Oh, there's the David Mamet thing.
Oh my god. Let's do the Caitlyn Jenner thing just because I've seen that already, and then we'll take a call and then figure something out. Stuart Varney. I'm sorry, Stuart Varney. He's just over the top. Had Caitlyn Jenner on his Fox Business program where they keep the hosts too crazy for Fox News proper. He had Caitlyn Jenner on, and she was asked if she is supportive of Ron DeSantis's "Don't Say Gay" legislation in Florida. And here's what she thinks about it.
Did Florida do the right thing, banning the teaching of gender identity to very young children?
Absolutely. I'm a big supporter of Ron DeSantis and what he's doing. I'm a parent. I have a very large family, raised a very large family, a lot of grandkids.
Great morals.
And I have been in control of my children's destiny and what they're going to learn in school. Not some math teacher teaching my kids about gender identity.
Right.
I can teach those lessons. So, yeah.
Again, they never really mention a specific example of where a math teacher, for instance, mentioned like homosexuality, and it scandalized kids to the point where there was irreparable damage. That none of this stuff is actually happening. Like what they're actually doing, just to reiterate, is trying to discipline teachers from even mentioning that that's a natural part of life, that there might be, that Dave Rubin might be able to have kids with his partner, for instance.
Right.
Yes, I am in support of Ron DeSantis and what he has done there. I'm disappointed in the backlash that he's gotten, especially from Disney. This is a legislation that supports parents. And the parents are the ones that are paying Disney to go to Disneyland.
Exactly.
And it's unfortunate to see them react to it this way.
Yeah, parents are pretty much all consumers, so that's doesn't give them special rights over a entertainment corporation, but they're the adults, so they spend money. Yes,
Yeah.
but she kind of, first of all, she's so robotic when she responds. I am a supporter of Ron DeSantis. Like, we understand that this was the mission of your appearance on Stuart Varney's show today, right? You were there to yes and about the Don't Say Gay bill. You were there to, as a trans woman who's was lauded for her bravery preemptively by a lot of these like media organizations, given the fact that most people in the trans community find her views to be abhorrent and regressive, as you can see there. She was there to give a voice to this bigoted legislation coming from a trans person. She couldn't have been more transparent in that mission. And then she says, I have been in control of my children's destiny and what they're going to learn in school, not some math teacher, blah, blah, blah. I can teach those lessons. I've been saying this for a while about some of the roots of the emotional motives behind this kind of legislation. Conservative parents like this see their children as an extension of themselves. It's a socially acceptable form of narcissism, how they talk about this. They don't want to think about the fact that their children might have agency. They don't want to think about the fact that their children might have views that diverge from their own. And so they're trying to codify that like basic insecurity about their children growing outside of their control and influence into legislation. And like that overlaps a lot with puritanical views about sex and gender and bigoted views about sex and gender as well. and sexual orientation. And so to me, that's like an underreported element of some of this "Don't Say Gay" legislation, is that parental control, parental rights, it's really about how can I control and indoctrinate my child in the vision that I see fit, as opposed to like respecting the fact that they are individuals themselves. And I I don't know. I mean, I'm maybe I'm like just like partially triggered about that, because like, do you remember when you were kids and if someone was like validating to you as opposed to being really dismissive of you? Sometimes like, a kid that likes to express myself a lot, and there's a ton of value in when somebody um doesn't try to stifle you or put you in a box, as opposed to like, allowing you to express yourself and be yourself. Um, and this kind of legislation wants to stifle that. You're a bad parent if you support this stuff. You really are, because it's all about you. It's all about you.
Yeah, it's all about ideological discipline. I mean, this is the same exact thing. And I mean, the parental rights thing is their new rallying cry, but this is like the same parental rights for your kid to not be exposed to the teaching of evolution in schools. Like, this is the exact same thing. And I think, I mean, people need to be able to stand up for public education as a extremely valuable good and a good thing that we've been doing, and we should expand it. And this is all an attack on it. The parental choice thing is a call for more parochial forms of education, as opposed to state-funded schools and state-funded teachers.
Yeah, it's also a way, of course, to undercut that. But yeah, I can't get over the disrespect of the perception of children, and like I mean, and their own individuality, and the fact that they will eventually be adults. It's just that they don't. The right wing. It's so crazy, because the right wing talks about how they're always about protecting the children, protecting the children, when all they want to do is stifle children. I mean, and they only see children as like ways to peel off power from the left by indoctrinating them into our perspective. Like, they're just potential foot soldiers in the culture war, and that's how they're treated, as opposed to, people with complex human beings like all adults. I don't know. Let's do that other the clip I sent from what's his name? Yeah, the Glenn Ross guy. Is that in the sound sheet? What number is that? 14. Oh, here we go. Playwright David Mamet, who wrote Glenn Ross. I haven't seen the whole movie, but I have seen that Alec Baldwin always be closing speech. Seems it's pretty legendary, so surprised that he's a right-wing reactionary. He maybe says the quiet part a little bit too loud when talking about teachers in general, in regards to "Don't Say Gay" legislation throughout the country, and particularly in Florida.
But we have to take back control. If there's no community control of the schools, what we have is kids being not only indoctrinated, but groomed in a very real sense by people who are, whether they know it or not, sexual predators. Are they abusing the kids physically? No, I don't think so. But they're abusing them mentally and using sex to do so. This has always been the problem with education, is that teachers are inclined, particularly men, because men are predators, to pedophilia. And that's why there were strict community strictures about it. Thank God. So this started to break down when the schools said, you know what, we have to teach the kids about sex. Why? Because what if they don't do it at home?
And this is exactly it. All of these people who want to, like, whether it's Joe Rogan or like a Substacker saying that parents have the rights to, like, against anti-CRT. This is all basically saying parents should have the right to say abstinence-only education is the only one we're going to teach at the school. Like this is just a new version of that discredited argument.
Except though that he is a bit more explicit in saying that men are predators in particular, and that teachers are quote inclined to pedophilia. I mean, they're targeting gay teachers there. Male gay teachers is what he's largely referring to, but it's an effort to undercut teachers in general. And this is worse than undercutting them from a funding perspective. The right's always going to do
Oh,
that.
this is about stoking violence against them. Tucker
Yes, I was about to
Carlson.
say this. There's going to be a freaking shooting of a teacher soon.
Tucker Carlson is talking about you should thrash a teacher, and Glenn Greenwald's talking about Alex Morse and how the Democrats are the real anti-LGBT people. It's despicable.
Yeah, I know. It's like I saw that. I saw Glenn's only response.
Glenn's a Republican campaign operative.
Yep, his only.
I would love to fall in love with. Sorry to keep putting you up, but
No,
I would
it's
love
okay.
to fall in love with anything as fast as Glenn Greenwald falls in love with new ads from Peter Thiel-backed candidates.
Yeah, it seems almost instantaneous. Odd. Can't address the Republican, the active Republican resurgence of anti-gay, not just rhetoric, but legislation. So when confronted about that, conservative reactionaries like Glenn Greenwald have to say, but what about the Democrats? It's like hypocrisy shaming is the only way for these guys to like deflect from this monstrous undertaking that's happening right now.
And the worst part of that was he said it was coming from the liberal left, which is no, it's coming from the corporate center against a leftist challenger.
Yep.
But again, Glenn works against the left.
Yeah, that's what he's there for. I mean, again, teachers are inclined to pedophilia. A teacher's gonna die soon. A teacher is gonna get killed soon. I mean, this is really, really crazy stuff. Gay teachers are and trans teachers and queer teachers in general throughout the country are in danger right now because of this right-wing rhetoric. You know, this reminds me of the baby killer stuff from, what was that, O'Reilly?
Tiller.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is about also encouraging LGBT teachers to retire or discourage them from getting into the profession at all.
Spewing on. Here in Ontario in 2019, the Premier of Ontario was voted out because she wanted to introduce LGBTQ into public school curriculum. Canada is not immune to reactionary, bigoted politics, for sure. Nah, that definitely. Barmanon, hey, Majority Crew, just wanted to point out regarding the bonus for the BMI reduction, they aren't offering this as an awesome incentive for their employees. The insurance probably is offering the company a huge kickback if the employees achieve a healthier status, aka BMI under 25. Yeah.
Here's a fun little game we got from our insurance company.
Valley Girl, I average 20,000 steps a day, Monday through Friday, because I have a mini elliptical under my desk at work, but I will never give my boss any info regarding my BMI. They will never pay me enough for that.
What are your results with the mini elliptical? That sounds interesting.
Good for you. Yeah. I'm far too lazy for that. Bourbon Socialist, working at an animal shelter, walking dogs is a part of my job, and I get just over 12K steps a day on average. Telling employees to just get started with 10K steps a day, that's going to be in addition to them working an entire day, is ridiculous. And they're going to dangle extra pay over the workers' heads in order to do what? Make them less costly on the insurance side? This culture is completely dystopian. Yeah. Neutrino chirality is best. Had a centrist argue with me on social media that since the bill doesn't directly target LGBTQ discussions, the bill isn't discriminatory. The lack of critical thinking to ask why this bill was written and how it is likely to be used in the real world, despite what the letter of the law says, is troubling and serves to show how centrists lack any actual interest in understanding the broader implications of a law.
Yeah, they sort of weaponized pedantry of like, it doesn't actually say this or that. We all know what the results and the meaning of this legislation is.
But the fact checker says that it doesn't directly say we hate gay people in the bill.
Yeah, fact checkers are counter-revolutionary.
Let's take a call. Calling from a 575. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is Jeff from New Mexico.
Jeff from New Mexico, what's on your mind?
Well, I was just calling. I thought it was a great interview. I thought that, but with all these kinds of interviews, I always get a little bit, especially with people that are doing stuff that is very hyper focused on something like efficiency or something like that, because I think there are just some missing parts always in these kind of discussions, because we always tend to forget that the big differences between, like the Great Society programs and the big and kind of this programs that were brought up in during the New Deal, where during the New Deal, all those programs had massive industrial investment behind them to kind of build up an industrial base to facilitate the investment in the back end programs that were being facilitated for kind of the programs, whether it be Social Security, whether it be any of those programs, whereas the Great Society and especially the environmental programs that were implemented in the 70s, they did the things like the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, all these things had already been closed, and now the thing that I always try to push left wingers towards, and granted it never happened, and someone like Tony Benn was defeated in the UK, is towards the ideas surrounding industrial democracy, etc. So that's all. That's what I wanted to quickly bring up, and just to mention that, for example, many engineers at that time were actually big supporters of industrial democracy, and although it didn't go forward as everyone would have hoped at that time, and was defeated by Thatcherism, there was a big push for a certain set of ideas that were a lot different than what happened, for example, in the United States. So that's all I wanted to bring up, and just remind people that those ideas were actually out there.
Great points. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. You all have a great rest of your day.
You too.
I have some David Mamet updates. I wasn't really familiar with his move to the right, so I looked it up a little bit. This is from 2012. In his new book, The Secret Knowledge on the Dismantling of American Culture, published last June, Mamet describes his late political conversion to conservatism and launches a scathing attack on the value system and way of life of those on the left. It's funny how much of this sounds exactly like this is 10 years ago. It sounds like it was written today. And then he writes, this sounds like it was written 10 years ago. The Israelis would like to live in peace within their borders. The Arabs would like to kill them all, he writes, as he sees it. The liberal West would like the citizens of Israel to take the only course which would bring about the end of the disturbing, quote, cycle of violence. That course is abandoning their homes and their country. Is this desire anti-Semitism? You bet your life it is. So that's just some of David Mamet's opinions.
That colors things. Left Wing Limbaugh. Hey, Amar, just want you to know that you're a show. You're not heroes of the left, but also you could be heroes of the left. You're really popular, but also you're insignificant. It's all very confusing, actually. I have no friends. Thanks. Winnipeg Craig. I'm on a big health kick lately and dropped a lot of weight, but the number one thing that allowed me to do it was having good paying unionized job that gave me some stability and time to focus on my health. 100%.
I mean, that's such, especially in a place like New York, which, like, if I didn't have the luxury, if I worked farther away and had to take the subway into work, then what am I doing to get fit? Like, I guess jogging in an area that's really dangerous unless you're jogging late at night because of car traffic, or joining a gym for an extremely obscene amount of money. Like, gyms in New York City are I remember I had Anytime Fitness in Fargo, and that was 24-hour gym for like a fraction of the price that I pay. I used to pay. I don't have a gym now, but used to pay for Planet Fitness here.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's interesting. I was thinking, or reading something about this is not earth shattering, but beauty standards and like how they shift over time, right? And just like 100 years ago, or even a little bit before that, a woman being pale and also having like a little bit of like plumpness was considered more beautiful because it signified wealth. You had the time to sit around and eat and you had access to food and
You
you
were out of
weren't
the
going
sun.
outside and you weren't working in the sun. And it's the flip now. It's, you have the money that can take you on a vacation that gives you a tan and leisure time to allow it. And if you're in shape, that's a wealth signifier because you have the ability to go to the gym. So, like, it,
And access to a better diet.
yeah, it's, it really is all about, uh, wealth signifiers. Calling from a 337 number. Who's this where you're calling from? 337.
C'est moi? Is it me?
This is you.
Okay.
What's your name?
Jean.
And are you calling from France?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
Uh,
great. What's your name?
I don't know if that's great, but my name is Jean.
Jean from France.
Yes. So I feel a bit lost because I've been a majority report watcher since quite a long time now, and I've bought into the idea that so oh
Well, tell us a little bit
I'm
about the
sorry.
election and your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I wanted Jean-Luc Mélenchon to win, obviously. I think so. A general stance that I see a lot of people of the left having is that they will abstain for this election. I've asked around a little bit to understand what specifically was leading people to such stance, and so outside of the pretty common, I really can't vote right now. I don't feel like it. I've heard arguments such as maybe arguments that might be a bit reflective of how Macron is not fully well perceived and its politics is not fully well perceived in the international. So there is this argument that is prevalent, at least in my circles and in the media that I watch, that you shouldn't vote because you shouldn't vote for far right, a far right candidate and fascism. And I see a lot of people, and I don't fully disagree with that. That understand
that are frustrated with their choices between Macron and Le Pen.
For sure, and that really think that Macron is a neo-fascist candidate, and there has been the deep ramping up of anti-Muslim rhetoric, arresting 400 children in their home because they refused to participate in a minute of silence for the death of a teacher that has been politicized to ramp up Muslim anti-Muslim rhetoric. There has been the inaction on climate change, which is pretty fitting for neoliberal politics, I would argue. That's something that weirdly brings some weird leftists to think that they should vote for Marine Le Pen because there is at least some supposed thing in her program. And
but at the same time, it's like, much like largely what we saw with Trump here, it seems she is and you're in I've only done some reading, so this is I'm asking if this is the case, if she is speaking about social programs as a more vaguely but as a fascist far right candidate, if she were to win, would not enact those changes, more just using them for populism's
I
sake.
believe she would not.
Right.
That depends. There is some social proclivities that she has that clearly excludes migrants and all that, and on those specific social, let's say, advances, maybe she would do something, but this is not the kind of social advances that we need in any case. So there's that. So I'm lost, and what is your opinion on the stance that many leftists have? Many leftist politicians have called for not voting. Many leftist activists have called for not voting. What do you both think of that?
I think it sort of focuses too much on voting. Like I personally, I don't know what I would do. I think it is a horrible choice. I wouldn't vote for Le Pen. Maybe you do. I don't know how elections work in France. I do know that abstinence alone doesn't send a message. I've never. I don't really think that works.
I agree.
So I think it's sort of like whatever people decide to do, whether they do the so-called harm reduction vote for Macron, or don't vote at all. Like I don't think that's a moral failing, either one of those things. But I do think like an overemphasis on this might lead people to suggest that by not voting, that's also going to lead to someplace better than voting for one of the two candidates. And the truth is, probably like that's not going to change the path that this is on. It's going to take. I mean, France is very good at getting in the streets. It's going to take something like that to get any of this stuff addressed.
Yeah.
Look, I think you do vote for. I think you vote for Macron. That's. Yeah, I mean, I voted for Hillary Clinton and I voted for Joe Biden, for those same reasons.
Yeah, I understand that. I appreciate the bluntness. If I can, for me right now, I'm really focused on the legislative, because that's going to be, in my mind, the important thing where we can restrict the power of a Macron or a Marine Le Pen to be able to deconstruct social programs, to do things like that. And the party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon really has some chances of having a lot more seats.
See, yeah, that's what's important. Like that like the lower elections, and I don't know how it works in France, but like that would be my concern about any abstinence strategy, which is like, okay, if leftists are just going to stay home on election day, what's that going to do to everybody else that needs to win an election that day? And that's what you do at the top of ballot. Again, like vote from. I understand why people have a tough time supporting him when he's like I mean, every freaking part of the guy. And so like I think that's less important, but I do think like if an abstinence strategy included like I'm going to go vote for these other elections that are important and maybe like the choices are a little bit better, then I think that's the important thing to emphasize.
Yeah, I agree with that. And well, I have a lot to reflect on, because I'm part of the people that think about abstaining, but I'm also really bothered by the idea. So I thank you for
Well, thank you for your call. I mean, I appreciate hearing some insight into the conflict here of like, and Mélenchon came so close. So that must be very painful, and I'm sorry that you're going through that right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye, John. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my choice to vote for Joe Biden in New York State was really like, first of all, I don't put much stock into it. I don't think it's that important, but also it's just like a rhetorical thing. So when you're arguing with people, there's certain type of folks who will take if you say, yeah, I voted for him, whatever, I still think like all these A, B, and C suck, whereas those people will just tune out. And I'm less interested in appealing to like Green Party folks, because I don't think their head's where it should be.
Nope. I was on the campaign trail, interviewed some Green Party people, and it was an interesting experience.
How's
Anyway,
the People's Party doing?
yeah, checking in on that.
How are the people that suggested that might be a good use of people's energy? Are they
They're doing anti-vax stuff now.
No.
Let's just do 15, this Trump clip, and then we'll do something else. But this made me laugh. Tish James. Trump was at a rally in North Carolina over the weekend, talking about New York Attorney General Tish James. And my guess here is that he confused her with somebody else, despite the fact that she's actively investigating him right now. Let's take a look.
This failed New York State gubernatorial candidate, Letitia James, who recently ran for governor and had to give up because she had no support. She got almost no poll numbers. Her party said, get the hell out. Is no longer working as the Attorney General. She went back into the Attorney General's office as a political operative for the Democrat Party, engaged in a political...
Okay. So when he said she's no longer working as the Attorney General, I want your guys' opinion. Did he confuse her with former District Attorney Cy Vance, who was leading the other investigation, the criminal one, into him, and then Alvin Bragg replaced him after an election? Thoughts? Talking to the mic.
Yeah, talk to the mic, brother.
I feel like he confused her. I feel like he confused her with like another black person, honestly. Like that's why I don't think it's Vance.
But I just how do you confuse the two heads of these massive investigations into you? Like, this isn't me confusing John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, both the senators from Texas. Not that I'd even do that. But these are two people that are intimately looking into you, either whether you're going to get sued a ton or whether you're going to go to jail. You might want to be a bit up on that. Letitia James.
That was his favorite part.
Yeah, he just wanted to say her name. He loves. He'll go Kamala, or, yeah. I can't even. I can't figure that one out. All right, let's do another clip. You guys have any thoughts? We got a lot today.
We got student loan clips. You want to do the Saki or Hemmer or Perino?
Okay. 5 and 4? Okay. So the conversation about student loan debt is ramping up right now. Biden has paused payments restarting for a 6th time through September, just continuously kicking the can down the road now 6 times. Like, I'm convinced he's going to keep doing this until after the midterms, and then maybe he'll begin to consider canceling student debt.
Hey,
maybe.
Keep it rolling.
Fine if that's the case, because for some reason he perceives student loan debt as a political liability, student loan debt cancellation rather, even though it's just the right thing to do. But there are a lot of Fox News geriatric viewers who feel like, I had to pay my student loans when my tuition was $700 a semester, and so you've got to do it too. And so here is Bill Hemmer on Fox News quoting a Wall Street Journal op-ed about student loan debt, appealing to that very audience that Biden is, I think, in my opinion, not rightfully afraid of.
Thank you. It is quite baffling to think that this is actually happening. The Wall Street Journal editorial board writing today, student loan forbearance forever. The progressives are demanding that President Biden forgive at least $50,000 per borrower by executive order. This would be an even bigger usurpation of Congress's power of the purse. What a way to stick it to Americans who didn't attend college or who have diligently repaid their loans.
Of which you're one.
Of
which I'm one.
Yeah, there's a lot of people.
And as we said yesterday, how many people are watching right now?
Yeah, I would love to have Bernie Sanders come on and explain
Same
to us and talk to us about why he thinks that all student loan debt should be canceled and how that could help the Democrats in the future
And
as
if
well.
the president punted this decision yet again, at what point is he going to say, okay, time to start paying?
Well, he
Is that
wanted
gonna
to
be
do it in
before midterm?
December,
I
but
don't
he
think
keeps
so.
getting pushed by the left.
Okay.
So
Watch
going to
where it goes.
continue.
So they're also news anchors. Might make it a little bit easier for them to repay their loans. I don't know what their salary is.
Or
but
whenever they graduated college.
Yeah, and Dana Perino also had some other parts of her career that might have made it a little her purse a little bit fatter. She wanted to repay her student loans, but like all of this pressure from the left that they're talking about, which he still has not caved to, by the way. I mean, here's Dana Perino again. This is the pressure that I think that they're actually seeing more of. Is the blowback from right-wing and centrist that if you hold no, it's okay. Right-wing and centrist anchors like this and lawmakers and policymakers and bankers who really don't want this to happen. Here's Jen Psaki fielding a question from Dana Perino, who seems to be making this her hobby horse.
That if you hold student loan debt right now, that you will ever have to make a payment during the Biden administration.
I suspect that sometime you will, but again, we are going to continue to assess every month, every few months on where things stand, both looking, of course, at COVID, but also economic data and where we need to continue to help give the American people some breathing room.
So speaking of COVID,
So she's saying, expect, don't worry, Fox News crowd. There will be payment that's starting again for your grandchildren. Don't worry, you won't have to worry about them not having the same exact experience as you, because like a lot of conservatives do. They perceive like their individual life experience and in any way that they struggled as character building that has to be discipline. It uses discipline for the generation below them.
The important thing about this is to step back and ask the question, where did student loans come from and why is there such a giant mass of debt in student loans right now? It's because America as a country decided, instead of granting people education like other countries do, and have it be just something we invest in and not need even the return on the investment back for the bankers, is that we just think it's a good thing society should have. In America, we basically determined in like the 60s and 70s that we can't just have a whole population of educated people that don't owe it or don't owe it to capitalists to break their back to work. So we created a system where student loans were financialized and put kids starting at like age 17, 18 into a lifetime of debt so they'd have to work for a corporation. This was a conscious decision to control the educated labor force. If you want to do something for kids that didn't go to college, one thing you could do is make college more affordable so it's not they're not price discriminated out of college. You could also give them healthcare and all sorts of different things like that, like things that they actually need, as opposed to just like as opposed to what like all these people, Perino and the right and even sort of corporate Democrats, what they want from the government now is for Joe Biden to pull the coerce workers button. And that's why they want student loans to get reinstituted, because that means, okay, I got to pay this, $400, $700 more a month now. I got to go work for this shitty restaurant that doesn't want to pay me a living wage. And like that's the problem. And so I am glad that in the midst of still a pandemic, but also just a horrible economic situation for folks, that they're not forced. I mean, I'm surprised, frankly, that the Biden administration hasn't caved yet so far, but I think it's a really good thing and should be applauded.
Yeah, I mean, they should just cancel it now.
They
But
should, yeah. But I mean, look, if this is the next best thing, and it,
if they do cancel it, though, if they do cancel it.
but even in the meantime, like it's been first of all, Trump started it, right? That's another thing we should
Yeah.
point out. So thanks for that, Trump. And it should be continued this way because it has done materially good things already, just not having people have to pay student loans for this like past couple of years.
It's mostly a way to discipline the workforce, as you say, but it's also a way to like preserve certain class stratification. Upper middle class is people, and upper class people, they're defined by their ability to send their kids to college without loans or with minimal loans.
Yeah.
And it protects them.
And all these people like that say, well, what about the people that don't go to college? Again, take care of their needs. Make sure that housing is within reach.
This isn't
for
a
them.
zero-sum game. It's ridiculous.
But I do think like there's all these debts. We need to start talking about wide, broad spread jubilee because I do think there's a problem when it does, like whether you're a person who has 100,000 in student loan debt, or if you're a trucker who has 100,000 of truck debt, or if you're a cab driver, or whatever. Like these sorts of debts, we've over financialized the economy to such a disgusting extent. And it's time for people who have expected to just get passive income out of investing into necessities like education. Like you shouldn't be education should not be a place that investors look for a return on investment. And I think like what really needs to happen is the people that make passive income, they need to start sacrificing. Then we need to start taking their money, and this would be a great way to start.
Yeah.
And except to student loans are paid to the government, which is just insane. But
let's take one more call. This is the final call of the day. Calling from 825 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Pradeep calling from Canada.
Pradeep from Canada. What's on your mind?
So, real quick, wasn't there an episode of The Office where they were trying to lose weight like that? That whole story reminded me of that Office episode.
Yeah, damn.
Where they're all...
That might have been a later season or something because I don't have as much memory of that. Is it, or it's early?
yeah, like 2 or 3 years.
Really?
Yeah, 2
Those
through
I
4
usually
maybe.
know down pat, but yeah, maybe that's what it is.
Right. So when that caller from India was like, "Oh, we have a great culture," I kept thinking of Michael Scott.
Yeah,
being
writing
their
in.
manager. But no, so something more closer to home here about Jordan Peterson and his call with, or his interview with Andy No. I think people didn't notice, but he got really emotional when he was talking about Antifa, right?
Yes,
And
we covered that on the
their
show.
sacrifices.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. But so it was like when their sacrifices went unrewarded, is what he said. So like I'm thinking like Andy No must have been going crazy, wondering like what's wrong with him, because Jordan Peterson was starting to empathize with Antifa, because Antifa is like the more violent, according to that conversation, and and Abel and Cain is more violent. So he started empathizing, and Andy No must have been like, "What is this mess in front of me?"
Yeah, I was that his? I couldn't really make out what he was saying, but I mean, I thought he was talking about. I don't know. It's too far out of my brain now, but I trust what you're saying.
Right. And yeah, it's just crazy. But so just real quick, the abortion case, or the indictment anyway, in Texas, Lizella Herrera. So the issue there too, when the caller today was talking about how, the healthcare providers can kind of like fudge the numbers or skirt the law one way or the other. In this specific case, it was the healthcare providers who called the police and said that she tried to induce an abortion. And then the prosecutors went forward with the case. The grand jury indicted her on the case with a statute that clearly says unborn children don't apply in this statute, right? So like the death of unborn children cannot be prosecuted.
Right.
So there's like, I think one of two things that's going to be happening. One is they're probably going to continue, even if there's no claim and there's no like legal basis for carrying out these cases, they're still going to try. I mean, it went all the way. The grand jury went through with it. The DA had to be like, yeah, there's no bearing it up. But on top of that, I think what's going to probably happen is they're going to pass a law to make it illegal to try to induce an abortion. And then, so this is just a snowball, and it's going to get worse and worse. So the idea that a healthcare provider, I mean, there's a huge chance that a lot of those healthcare providers agree with outlawing abortion too. So that I don't find too much solace in that idea.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Yeah, the suggestion was coming from like a, how can we help out women in the short term? But I do have those same concerns that you do. But I appreciate it, Pradit. Thanks so much for your call.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. All right, that is the final call of the day. Aaron is not cool. There's Jordan B. Peterson Twitter threads where you can tell he's in absolute tears by the end of the thread. Michael from Bavaria. By the way, if Biden has any political instinct left, he should cancel it in September, not now. Right before the election?
Sure.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that's not the electorate that Democrats want to turn out.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm concerned. Is I feel like they would rather make sure that the people that from the suburbs that for some reason want people to start paying student loans again. I mean, maybe I'll be wrong. I wasn't necessarily expecting this. It's interesting about this decision because I remember when the last pause was placed it right after sort of May Day. And you see all these left accounts being like, just in time for us to massively protest for him to make it permanent. And then right before that, it's just like, no, we're going to boot it another.
Yeah, right, exactly. White communist. Assume Le Pen isn't just using it as a fig leaf and for her racist fascism, but is sincerely committed to social programs and more racism in France. What parts of the left will vote for such a fascist candidate or reject her for a less racist neoliberal when those are the choices? Because of the potency of racism in America, this is the question for the left here too. We must learn that unyielding struggle against racist ideology is 1, the moral fight, and 2, the only path to leftist victory in a white supremacist society. Without left solidarity against racism, the right will always be able to outflank the left with racism. Well said. Too many in the left tragically treat racism as a mere cultural annoyance and shuffle aside with Marxist ideology, a good doctrine, but doomed alone in a white supremacist hegemony. Yeah, can't say I disagree. Really cool. Alvin Bragg is Manhattan DA. Tish James is New York State AG. Yes, I know. My point is like that his office though was conducting an investigation into him, and he seemed to get confused about who was no longer in their respective office. Each of them conducting investigations. T Dizzle for Shizzle. Another important part of Ohio's proposed Don't Say Gay bill that would also try to do away with anything perceived as quote critical race theory. Yeah, it's all the same trunk of the tree coming from that. Intervention MR. Stop interfering in foreign election crew. You have no clue about cultural and local policy implications of voting for Macron. You are so entitled. To say is an easy choice between right and right. So naive. You have no clue how he's destroying society and his anti-Muslim narratives. Pretty sure I laid that out pretty succinctly at the beginning of the show, but
I mean, also, I don't quite those sorts of like they're more interested in psychoanalyzing us as media personalities than offering details. Like I don't know what that says that contradicts anything that I said.
being psychoanalyzed as a media personality is like, I don't know if you have that down pat, honestly. Spewing on. Emma didn't say it exactly. However, the Florida bill is stochastic terrorism. Yes, good point. Demian. Hey, so quick Michael related thing. Recently, there has been some toxic drama in the online left. No kidding. And a lot of crap have been directed towards Hassan from Vaush's community. Who cares, right? But somebody asked Hassan how Michael would feel about this online infighting and canceling, and Hassan's reply was great. He basically said, Michael was a friend of mine, and I don't feel it's appropriate to use his memory as some sort of weapon. Michael and I talked about this, and our content is available online. If you want to know how Michael would feel about this, you could just look up his massive body of work and read his book. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's very well said.
very well said. Contrast that with other people who have,
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow this drama.
yeah.
I saw Volch got into some with ContraPoints too. I kind of, well, I guess I like Hassan. Hassan showed up to our live show in TMBS in LA, and I think he's a nice guy. So I'll on the basis of that, say I side with Hassan.
I also like Hassan. So there you go. Yeah, I don't even know how to use Twitch, so there's that. I guess I could, but I don't game, so I don't really see the point of me tuning in there. But it's a big. I mean, if you're watching on Twitch, enjoy.
I only watch the Go Off Kings.
Fabu Cat. Chris Coons once got me suspended from Twitter. I had criticized his opposition to gun buybacks. How he's opposed to gun buybacks. Fierce Deity. Pretty glad the Celtics didn't draw Toronto in the first round because the rumor mill has made it sound like Jaylen Brown isn't vaccinated, and I'd rather live in ignorance than have that confirmed because he's always seemed like a smart guy with pretty good politics in
Wow.
addition to being a great player.
He's a great player. He's fallen behind Tatum this year, and that would be another terrible indicator for the trajectory he's on.
I always feel like I hear more about like the potential of the Celtics than is ever actually realized. Yeah, they're playing well now.
Well,
I've tuned out for a month since the Knicks
they
have
were
been in.
they were doing really well, but Time Lord's out now, so they're not going to
Yeah.
be an actual contender.
Steely Danarchy, how many of these anti-LGBTQ, anti-abortion bills are going to lead a slow brain drain in the states that are enacting them?
Yes, I mean that's part of they like that.
I'm a cishet man and I don't see myself taking a good job in Texas. What if my potential wife has pregnancy issues? What if I had a kid that might be trans? Small risk maybe, but not one I'm willing to take. Yeah, I get it. Illuminati kids, the caller is coming from a good place, but in the world where a woman was arrested and held for days with a $500,000 bail for something constitutionally
Yeah.
protected, I don't see where citing HIPAA comes in. The goal is the
Right.
chilling effect itself, so they're only limited by what locality lets them get away with it. Even Roe v. Wade is saved somehow. Even if Roe v. Wade is saved somehow, it seems like we're headed towards balkanization of states on abortion rights, where you're going to need a full Little Rock 9 style escort at clinics.
Also,
Jesus.
like they don't care about HIPAA rights. Like,
Yes, they
that's
use
just
it.
something to say when you get asked about vaccines. They don't give a fuck at all about them.
Turning like the right wing's rhetoric onto them and weaponizing it to that extent really doesn't have a ton of value except
Yeah, the buy your logic move does not work.
especially in practical terms outside of like a debate. Two kids in the trench coat. Okay, Emma, I have another offer. The Giants' 5th pick for the Packers' 92nd, and lessons from Daniel Jones from Aaron Rodgers on being a quarterback and Joe Rogan's phone number. Nope. The Saints, I think, are a dark horse to trade up with the Giants, though, with the 16th and 19th picks. Might want to get ahead of Carolina, who's going to take a quarterback. But it's too bad for my Giants that this is not a very strong quarterback draft. Kowalski from Nebraska. Howdy, MR Emergency Millennial Crew. I just want to point out that Abraham Lincoln supporting a colony for former slaves was a mainstream abolition goal prior to the Civil War. It was hard to know what was Lincoln's view on race, given he was a mid-19th century politician whose voting base were on the whole white supremacists. Yes.
Yeah, he was also like going into it a conservative unionist, meaning he wanted to fight the Civil War, but mainly just to keep the Union intact and
Mhm.
not to, any of their more radical demands. I mean, that's the thing is like, look, I think Lincoln is the best president we've ever had, and I also think like all these sort of confounding factors of that and how he was needed to be pushed and all that stuff is really important to keep in the conversation as opposed to just saying, "Oh, look at this great thinker who, through his genius, freed the slaves."
Miss Heathen, sometimes I use the majority report IMs to vent my frustrations. Frustrations with the point of presidents, frustrations with Democrats not doing enough, frustrations with bigots and bosses, frustrations with all the unstoppable threats millions of people are facing in different ways. Like dealing with my own personal shit, all I feel is sadness. I get these inevitable waves of depression, then majority report gives me a laugh or two, and I feel a bit more grounded. Thanks, guys. Oh, I'm glad. I'm sorry you're dealing with that, but I'm glad we can be a reprieve in some way. Grandstanding oppression party. Fuck yes. Harry Truman sucked. Wish we would have had Henry A. Wallace. Turning point in history. Jen Hexer. They don't base the timing of a pregnancy on when a women have sex. It's based on the date of the beginning of a woman's last period, and her ovulation is figured out from that date, right? May Cook. Emma, you keep saying you like Wise, but what do you like about Wise? Personally, I hate Wise. I don't know what you're talking about. You guys have any sense what that means?
0.
Okay. We're gonna do like 5 more IMs and then we're gonna get out of here. Between the 101 and the 5, political philosophy is code for we don't care about working people. Mojomin, talking about the new age community in some of the local artist circles where political activism was happening, all of a sudden I got dampened down because of the new I'm sorry. In some of the local artist circles where political activism was happening, all of a sudden it got dampened down because the new age psychedelic society stepped in and distracted everybody. Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting CIA conspiracies about how all that movement is lousy with CIA sort of MK Ultra stuff.
Prairie Frau Kowalski, great interview today. We know Sam is fine with his apples. Emma, your views on Chicago style pizza are not good in showing off your East Coast elite mindset of underground trains and brunch centered day drinking. I do like both of those things. Matt knows my wolf views on the pizza conversation. Left is deep dish, the people's pizza. You're disgusting, Kowalski. Disgusting. DeSanta, love the new Monday without Sam, not missing him at all. Not crew. What happens if, if DeSantis and Trump are the final 2 nominees in the Republican primary in the next presidential election? For harm reduction, isn't it better if Trump wins? DeSantis can destroy our lives if he is competent, proper fascist. I think the real proper fascist is who's going to run is Tom Cotton, but
Tom Cotton doesn't have the smoke, though. I really think it is going to be DeSantis. The entire conservative media sphere is lockstep behind DeSantis. Like, I mean, Rubin has DeSantis in the headlines of his podcast like twice a week, even though DeSantis like barely will pose for a picture with him.
Yeah.
Crowder, obviously a big fan too, and a lot of people running interference for him in media. It's going to be very interesting. I will be going for Trump, honestly. I think in that because I think DeSantis is scarier. I genuinely I think Trump is the devil.
DeSantis won't run if Trump's running, in my opinion.
I don't know. I don't know why he has such a giant sort of.
He's Trump without the baggage. That's what they think.
But that's the thing is like he's running as if he's gonna run. Like I don't know why he has this sort of formation unless he is gonna run.
Maybe you're right. I just don't know what he does, how he positions himself when the real deal's in the mix.
I kind of don't think he's gonna run, but maybe I'm wrong. Trump.
Maybe. Again, that's what I'm saying. It's just that DeSantis is the favorite if Trump isn't in. Then it's like if Trump's in, it's chaos.
I would love them both to be in, and I think Trump would win. I think.
Full roll. Emma, lovely interview in the first half. It was a good crash course on what the state thinks like. Quick question on polls. You rightly quote them when nationwide polls talk about supporting progressive policies, but did you know that 64% nationwide are against transgenders competing in women's sports and 56% of Democrats are for the Don't Say Gay bill when the terminology, when the bill is actually put in front as without using Don't Say Gay terminology? Why do you selectively ignore popularity of Republican politicians like that? Is one reason they are not challenged on the ground. I actually cited that poll talking about it because that one was cited in the Wall Street Journal that you're referring to about the Don't Say Gay bill, but Ipsos had a contradictory poll that did not say that. And I don't know the last time I have quoted a nationwide poll about progressive policies I've tried to steer away from that because I think populism has its limits, as you described, because there are things that you fight for even when they're unpopular, like transgender rights right now, because then you change the conversation and hopefully in 10 years max, that's like completely inverted those poll numbers or even more. And then for like policies that don't have to do with bigotry, it just shows why the Democrats are feckless in certain areas. I don't know. Everything's contextual. And the final IM of the day, bury the orc. Be Rory the orc. I think DeSantis is positioning himself this way because he does not want to run if Trump does. But like everyone else, he has honest to God no idea if Trump is actually going to run or not. This is the only explanation I see for his positioning without already announcing.
See, I think that there is self-preservation instinct kicking in on the Republican Party, and they don't want Trump to run again. And I think DeSantis is a big part of that.
But that's why that was my point. That's why I think they're uniting behind him, because they see him as Trump without the like insurrection stuff.
Yeah.
And like somebody that can excite their base, which I don't think is wrong. All right, folks. Thanks for the great show today. Open Sam is doing okay. Give you an update on that soon. See you guys tomorrow.
3 months from now, 6 months from now.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice is made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I get somewhere I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted